Hello everyone, Danasa here with ActionVFX. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create this cool looking ice freezing effects in Adobe After Effects. We will be using ActionVFX collections such as Ice and Frost, Cold Breath, and Air Particles to do these effects. So, without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so this is the plate. So in this tutorial, we are going to track my entire face and then add some ice texture on it. To do the tracking, we'll be using one of my favorite plugins, MochaPro. So, click on the symbol, and then here inside of Mocha, what we want to do is to create a PowerMesh instead of just a normal planar tracking. Because my head is turning around and you can see my skin is stretching a little bit, so we need to get distortion data of my face. So first, let's decide the reference frame of my shot. I will pick this last frame here because this is where the skin of my face is mostly exposed. Now let's create a big shape that surrounds the shape of my head. And then on the track tab, let's check perspective and mesh. And here you can see that Mocha has created this spider web looking polygons on my spline. So the way PowerMesh works is that these individual points would track certain parts of my face, and the movement between all those points would dictate the shape of these polygons, which in turn creates distortion track data that we can apply to our ice elements later. But currently, I don't like the shape, so let's switch our mesh to uniform, and then let's set the size to 70, and then generate. Perfect! Now we have a busier point, which would give us more informed tracking. So now what I want to do is to clean up my mesh points. For example, I don't want to track my eyes. So let's click on Edit Mesh, and click Add Points, and I want to start create a shape around my eyeballs. So then I can delete the one point that is tracking on my pupil. Now I have a mesh warp that is shaping around my eye socket. And then here between my earlobe and my neck, it is currently being treated as one flat plane, which isn't correct. So let's separate that by creating a point there. And I want to continue create a border between my ear and my neck. Same goes with my nose. I want to create a border around it to let Mocha know that there is a depth. We can turn off the spline so it's not distracting and add points and shape the edge of our nose there. And then on the mouth, let's create a shape around my lip and delete the point that is inside my mouth. And then also, let's create a border on my collar here. It's also a good idea to keep some of these excess mesh that are outside of my face as to make sure that we have extra space outside of our track. So if our points are being pulled in towards my face, our texture won't be cropped. Now we have our mesh, let's turn on the spline again. So this time I want to disable our mesh. So this spline shape that we have here was used to generate our PowerMesh. That's why it is a bit rough and big. So now we are going to use this to drive the tracking data of our PowerMesh. So let's shrink this spline quite a bit, that way it's able to grab a good area of my plate to do some tracking. But we don't want to shrink it too much because the size of our spline basically dictates which mesh point will be active and tracking. So the points that are inside the spline will be tracking my face, and everything outside it will try to maintain its shape. So now let's track backwards. Okay, so this is our track. See how all the points that are inside the area of the spline is tracking, while all the points that are outside are just following along. However, here we can see that the mesh at the end is getting squashed. So the reason for that is because our spline track is getting squashed also, so everything that is inside the spline is being dragged along with it. So to combat that, what we want to do is to go to the frame just before our spline is getting squashed, and then pull the edge of our spline back. So now this back area of our mesh will not get affected by the spline. And then let's track backwards until the edges get pushed again. And basically redo this method until we don't have the squashed mesh. Okay, so this is our track. We don't need to worry about the beginning part of this because the freezing effects only appear around the second half of this shot. So next, what we want to do is to fix some little point mesh that is sliding on my cheek here. For this, I actually want to fix it manually. So just grab those points, add keyframe, and manually move them back in place. Then, we're gonna go to the Stabilize tab and make sure that our reference frame is properly set. So let's go to the last frame that we have established, and then click plus on the frame list. And then check on the mesh warp and click frame list again. And if we go through our shot here, we can see that the shot has been stabilized on our last frame. So this way, we can just drop in our elements on our composition, and then after that, destabilize it to make them track to my face. Okay, so everything is looking great, so we can just close and save. So we are back in After Effects. Now, we're going to start adding our ice elements. First, let's duplicate our backplate, and then pre-compose it, and move all attributes. And then inside the pre-comp, select the plate. Then we're going to go to the Mocha, and on the module render, let's check render, and change it to stabilize on warp. And now we have our plate stabilized. And then let's drag in our first ice element. So for our ice elements, we already have the animations of the ice forming. So it is perfect. We don't need to do an additional compositing to do the freezing animation. So now let's turn in the screen. However, I do want to make our ice to go a bit slower. So right click on the timeline column here and then make sure that our time stretch is turned on. So then we're going to click on the time stretch and make our ice to 100% slower. Okay, now let's drag our ice so it starts a bit later because we don't want it to be freezing right from the start. So the key to make our ice to not looking flat is to make sure that we use different eyes for different facial feature to separate them. So let's mask out this eyes for our nose first. Add some feather, and then we want our eyes texture here to follow our nose curvature a little bit. So let's click on Puppet Pin tool and start adding points to where we want to curve the eyes. And then start pulling those points to distort. Perfect. Next, I'm going to add another ice, but this time it's for my lips. So we're going to go through the same steps again. And then add eyes on my ears. And then eyes on my collar. Great. Next, I want to add eyes on my forehead. So here, I want to have my eyes to be below my hair. So let's duplicate our plate, put it on top of our eyes, and then we want to luma matte our eyes to the plate. So now our eyes is being masked out by the darker area of the plate, which is my hair. Let's add curve to the plate and contrast it a bit. And then let's add more eyes on my face. And then don't forget to distort the eyes to match the curvature of my jawline. And then for the hair, we're gonna do the luma matte again. So duplicate the plate, but this time we want to use luma inverted. That way, the eyes is masked inside the dark area, which is the hair. Okay, so now we have our eyes on my face. Now let's turn our plate at the bottom to guide layer. That way, the back plate will not be rendered outside of this pre-comp. Then, let's go back to our main composition. And here we can see that the black background of our eyes footage is back. So let's leave it for now. What we want to do is to first track this back into my face. So we want to destabilize the stabilized composition. So let's copy the Mocha from before and paste it into this pre-comp. And then on the module render, we're gonna check render and stabilize warp. And there we go. We have our elements tracked. Now let's remove the black background. We can do another screen, but this time I want to keep the layer style of our shot. So I want to use a plugin from Red Giant Universe called Unmold. Then let's add a bit of Gaussian blur to make it blend better with the shot. Great! Now as you can see, we have a little bit of texture there coming out of my head. So let's cut that out. Let's mask our eyes. Now I'm not going to spend time on this tutorial doing rotoscope. So I'm going to use this mask layer that I have made from my previous composition. So I made these three mask layers, the head, the front hand, and the back hand. The mask is not perfect as you can see, but for this project it is more than enough. You can download the alpha render files in the description below. So let's drag our head mask layer to the top of our eyes, then alpha matte it, and there we go. Next, we're gonna add a bit of color correction to my face. because as I get frozen, I want to have my skin becoming more blue. So let's create adjustment layer, put it below our eyes, and then let's add hue and saturation to our adjustment layer and reduce the saturation. And then add curve and increase the black level a little bit, and then let's reduce the red and increase the blue. And then let's bring the opacity, and we're going to add keyframes, and we want to animate this to go from 0 to 100 as the ice builds up. Now let's duplicate our head mask layer that we had before and put it above our adjustment layer, and then alpha matte it also. So now the adjustment layer only affects the head. So next, I want to match the lighting of our face to the plate, because as you can see, the chin area of my face is being covered by shadow. So the eyes on that area should be darker also. So let's duplicate our plate, put it on top, and then I want to add tint. And then invert, and then let's add some curve to create a bit more contrast. And let's name this shadow matte. And then I want to create another adjustment layer and put it below our tinted plate. And then I want to change the track matte to Luma matte. Okay, so now we can add curve and darken it a bit. And we have our eyes getting darkened based on the shadowy area of the plate. However, we don't want to mess around with the hair or other dark parts. We just want to mess with the shadow on the skin. So let's go to our adjustment layer and let's mask to where the shadow appear on the skin. And then we want to feather and animate it. Okay, so now the problem is our adjustment layer doesn't just darken the eyes, but also the plate. And we don't want that. So let's pre-compose the shadows and eyes layers. Let's name this Ice Face CC. Now the adjustment layer only affects the eyes layer because they have been isolated inside the pre-comp. Okay, so now let's create the ice freeze effects on my eyeballs. In order to do that, we need to track and create a mask on the shape of my eye sockets. So let's duplicate our backplate and go back to Mocha. Now we're going to delete the track that we have before to create a new one. Now we're only going to track my eyeball for the second half of the shot, because that's when we want to have the freeze ice effects to build up. And also this time, I want to do a simple planar tracking instead of PowerMesh. So because my eye here is twitching, we cannot just track my eyeball. We need to create a shape surrounding my eye socket and track that. So let's create a shape surrounding my eye and track. Okay, so now we have a decent track. Now let's disable the gear and the view of this track layer. Then we want to create a new mask on the shape of my eye socket. Then let's rename the new one right eyeball, and then on the link to track, let's parent this to our previous track layer. Now this mask has inherited the position, rotation, and scale of the previous one. Now let's do for the other eye. But this time I want to disable the shear, rotation, and scale because the other eye is obscured most of the time, so we want to just get the general position and deal with the size manually. Now let's name it left eye track, and then again disable this track layer and create a new spline mask for the eyeball. And then link it to the track layer. Now let's adjust the size. Okay, now close and save. Okay, now back in After Effects, let's put our eye track layer on top. And then on the Mocha, let's view what our matte looks like. So we will use this to mask out the effects for our eyes. Now let's disable the view matte and click on Apply Matte. So let's create an adjustment layer and then alpha matte it to our eye track matte. And then we're gonna add fast blur to the adjustment layer and blur it out a bit. And then add hue and saturation and desaturate it. And then let's add curve, increase the black levels high, and push down the midtones a bit. Okay, now we can see the hard edges of our matte. So let's go to our matte layer and add a fast blur to blur out our matte edges. Now we have this glossy frozen look on our eyeball. Let's animate the opacity of our adjustment layer to make it fade into the scene. Alright, looking great. Now let's add some icy frost texture to the eyeball. So first let's create two null objects and name them right eye and left eye. And then on the eyeball track matte layer, let's go to the Mocha tracking data and create tracking data. and then select our right eye and change the option to transform, and then we want to export the layer to our right eye null, and then apply export, and then do the same thing with the left eye track to the left eye null. And then we want to bring out another eyes element, make sure to put it on top, and then turn it to screen. Then let's get CC Sphere on our eyes. Reduce the radius until it matches to the size of our eyeball, and then let's solo our sphere for a second here. And then let's go to the light and play around to make sure that the lighting is coming out from the same angle as our real eyeball. Okay, now let's parent this to the right eye null, and perfect. Now let's retime it a bit. Next, let's create the second eyeball. So let's duplicate our current one, put it to the other eye, and then to make it different, let's go to the rotation of the sphere and then change it up a bit. And then parent this one to the left eye null. Awesome, so now we have this. Let's pre-compose our eyeball spheres and their nulls together. Great, now let's remove the black background of this pre-comp. This time, I want to use the unmold. Now let's mask this out so it would fit inside our eye socket. So let's duplicate the eyeball matte layer that we had before and then put it on top our sphere pre-comp and alpha matte our spheres to it. Okay, great. So now we have finished adding the ice freezing effects on my face. Now let's add more to my hands and the wall behind. For the hand on front, we will be revisiting the PowerMesh again. So let's duplicate our plate and then click the Mocha symbol again. And then in Mocha, we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to generate a PowerMesh, but this time I'm going to use the automatic mesh and not the uniform one because it fits perfectly with my fingers. And then after finish tracking, let's close and save. And then let's pre-compose our track and then add my eyes to the pre-comp. And then change the backplate to guide layer and then go outside and then destabilize the pre-comp. And then add another unmold to remove the background. And also let's add camera lens blur to defocus our eyes a little bit. And then let's add some blue color correction on my fingers like I did on my face. So let's duplicate the adjustment layer that has the color correction, put it on top, and then let's offset the opacity animation a little bit. And then let's mask this so it can only affect my fingers. So I will bring my mask layer of my front hand and then alpha matte the adjustment layer to it. Great, we have my front hand freezing. So next what I'm going to do is we're going to do the same thing to the back hand. So for the hand on the back, it was actually much easier. I actually did not end up doing any Mocha tracking at all because the ice is only forming when my hand is staying still. So all I did was just to bring the elements, pre-compose them, and then just mask it out using the mask layer for the backhand. So now we're going to add some shadow color correction on the eyes, just like what we did with the eyes on the head. So let's duplicate our plate again, put it on top, add tint, invert, and then curve to contrast it. And then add adjustment layer, luma matte it to our tinted plate, and then add curve. Now pre-compose the shadow color and the eyes together so the adjustment layer doesn't affect our entire plate. So now let's make my backhand blue also. So let's duplicate the adjustment layer with the color correction, and then alpha matte it to the backhand mask layer. And then lastly, we're gonna decorate the wall with eyes. I'm going to skip this part because this is very easy to do. What I did is I just freeze framed the eyes footage and then turned them all to 3D and decorate them around the scene. Okay, so everything is looking great. Now let's add a little bit of motion blur to our eyes on the face here. So turn on the motion blur button and add pixel motion blur to our pre-comp. Great! So now we're actually practically finished, but I want to add a little bit more stuff to really sell the shot. I want my movement at the end to get slowed down until I freeze. So we want to do some time remapping. And then I want to add some cold smoke breath and some air particles. So since I'm already finished with this shot, I'm just going to render this out. Okay, so this is the rendered file of our shot. So now let's drag it to a new composition. And then let's right click on the composition label. And on the settings, we're going to extend the duration a few frames, something like 175 frames. And then I want to right click on our render, and on time, we're going to select freeze on last frame. So now when we play, we can see that our footage is frozen right after the video ends. So that's what we want. However, the freezing at the end is too abrupt. So let's make it more ease. Let's go to a few frames before the shot ends, and then add keyframe to the time remap. And then let's right click on the keyframe at the end and change it to easy ease. And then let's pull the end keyframe to the right. So now this area is getting stretched and becoming slow motion. Great! Now let's toggle switch and double click on this box to enable frame blending. This way our slow motion would be smooth instead of jittery. And then finally, let's add some cold breath from our cold breath collection, and then air particles from our air particles collection. Now let's slow it down by 200%. And then let's create an adjustment layer, add some color correction. For example, I'm using Lumetri color to make the scene temperature a bit more cold. And then finally, I added a color grading LUT that I have here, and that was the tutorial on creating freezing ice VFX. Once again, if you want to purchase all the elements that I just used in this tutorial, you can check out our website at ActionVFX.com. At ActionVFX, we provide high-quality VFX assets for your VFX needs. We have fire, explosions, energy, and many others. You can also sign up for our ActionVFX subscription starting at the low cost of $14.99 a month. This is the most affordable way to access our library, and you can cancel anytime, no contract. Thank you so much for watching. Let us know in the comment section below what kind of tutorials that you'd like to see next. And see you next time. Bye bye.